and welcome to our author chat show from the Nebraska Writers Guild. I'm Victorine, and I have on the show with me Mary Schwaner. I'm so excited to introduce Mary tonight for our author chat. Mary Potter Schwaner studied opera at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. She devoted much time in her early career to performing, directing, and promoting musical endeavors throughout Alabama, California, and Nebraska. In Mary's other life, she was a computer tech support and graphic arts specialist and worked as a web developer. In her retirement, she is a published author, writing novels of historical suspense under the name Bailey Bristol. Courage in a White Coat is her first biographical novel. She lives in Nebraska with her husband of nearly 5 decades and joins him in doting on her grandchildren, who, along with their parents, are her dearest treasure. Mary's enduring motto remains, "May you have the vision and the voice to find new songs to sing." Welcome, Mary, to our show.
Thank you. I am so happy to be here.
Oh, we're so happy to have you. So tell us about yourself, Mary.
Well, you said it in a nutshell there. I've done a lot of things, but I grew up in a musical family, and I grew up playing violin in our family string quartet. And so that I was going to major in music, but I had fallen in love with the opera. So I abandoned my violin and took up the opera. And I had a wonderful early career with that and sang with Beverly Sills and Richard Tucker and wonderful big names in the opera. It was so marvelous to step foot on the same stage with them, even though I was in the opera chorus.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah. And started my family, have 2 children. Then I started directing community music theater groups and a community opera and some children's music theater events. We'd do summer camps, summer stage magic, music theater workshops for kids. So I did those in Alabama and California, and then we moved back to Nebraska. And had to, in looking for something that was a more gainful employment, I got in heavily into computer work. And I had done it on a low level because that was my husband's business. And we think we brought the first laser printer to the state of Nebraska.
Oh,
really and truly, we think we do in 1986, I believe it was. And people from Omaha big companies from Omaha would come down to see our laser printer because they just couldn't figure that this laser thing was actually going to work. And yeah, so we've been in technology from early on. And so that was a natural fit for me. And I did a lot of working in web development, etc. When in all of those things, you build graphic arts and you explore your creativity. So being a musician and then being in the graphic arts and web development and all that still fed my creative needs. Well, then, and I was still singing all this time. And as I got older, I was Madame Goldentrill. You couldn't be the young ingenue anymore. So I began to sing as Madame Goldentrill. But then I lost my voice very, very dramatically.
Oh, no.
It was a laryngitis brought on by an allergy. And when I recovered from that, I could only sing 3 notes in the middle of my voice.
Oh my goodness.
Couldn't sing hymns in church, couldn't sing anything. Well, I'd been a musician my whole life. And if I wasn't singing, who was I? There's this black hole. And I was 55 years old then when I completely lost the voice. So I started writing to fill that creative need. And I found out that I probably should have spent, a lot more years writing than singing, because it was a very comfortable place for me. It was a
Oh,
very good place uh, for me to explore and to grow. And I love to write. I love words. I love the rhythm of words, and the images that they can uh, pop into your mind. So I've been involved in writing now since 2000, heavily, well, since 2001, really. So for almost 19 years. And publishing as well. And the publishing has, when you're working for other people, their work comes first. So it's been hard to be as productive as I wanted to be with my own writing, but I have those two historicals and the historical biography out there and published, and I have 3 works in progress. So I think I may be getting a little more disciplined about hanging on to some writing time for me. But that's who I am. I've got 3 grandchildren that I absolutely adore, and never, ever would regret any interruption from them. They will always be number one in getting my time. But it's a good life.
Wonderful. We do have a question from a Facebook user.
Ah.
I remember Mary for when she had a publishing company. Does she still publish for others? So is that something you're doing still?
Yes, I have Prairie Muse Publishing, and I really, in order to keep the time manageable, I don't go out and look for people to publish for. Somehow they just find me, and I've published some of the most interesting books. One of the recent ones was for a memoir for a fella, and the title is Dangerous Dan, the Bomb Disposal Man. And he was a bomb disposal expert in World War II,
Wow.
exploding ordnance. The fascinating things I get to read just by publishing. So I publish on a small scale, except for Laura Landon. She's an author of historical romance, Victorian romance, and she's a dear friend and a very prolific author, and I will always, she'll be my number one, for anybody. If I have to decide who am I putting time in on today, Laura Landon will always be number one.
Yes.
But I rarely turn something down, but that's just because I'm not out there publicizing it. If people find me, it was pretty accidental that they found me. So I usually want to help them out and publish what they're interested in.
So we do have another question. What's your criteria for taking on a book to publish? So if they can find you, you'll take it?
If you can find me, you've got a chance. Well, I'll tell you, it depends on whether they want it published for their own satisfaction, for distributing to their family and things like that. If they want it published to as a writer building their career, there's so much they need to know. In order to really make it work, because none of us are going to promote the book like the author will.
Yes.
The author has to be invested in that book. And if they're looking for somebody who will publish it and promote it, I can't do that, and that's strictly because of time. I do not have the time to do justice. But if they want me to publish it and set it up on a KDP dashboard for them, and then they can take it and run with it and manage it from there, then that's fine. Criteria: I don't do erotica. I'm a very conservative individual, but other than that, and I do the cover design for all of Laura's books and my books and everybody I publish. I do the cover design for them. So if we have a meeting of the minds, that's fine. You're welcome to investigate. But if you don't like the things that a person presents you as a cover design or things like that, go to somebody else. It's your book. It's your heart that's tied up in this.
Yes.
Wait and search till you find the person who really, you have a meeting of the minds, and that person can present the book the way you want to have it presented.
So Leah's wondering what other services you provide. You talked about cover design. What else do you provide as a publisher?
Well, I just can't have something go out with a Prairie Muse name that has spelling errors and things like that, and grammar. So I will, as I format the books, I will edit them for that kind of thing. But it wouldn't be for me to do a developmental edit or to change their story at all. It would simply be, wrong use of the word, and I'll fix it. And of course, ask them. So it's very limited. I don't venture into changing people's work.
Sure. So tell us, what have you been writing? What are your books about?
Well, the first book I wrote that garnered me an agent was a historical called Into the Mouth of the Wolf. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but that's our motto in the opera, Nella bocca del lupo. When you don't tell somebody break a leg, you tell them Nella bocca del lupo, which means into the mouth of the wolf. If you can picture a ballroom or an opera house with the rows of kind of the horseshoe-shaped rows of balconies, tiers going up. Imagine yourself standing center stage and looking out at that, and it would be like looking into the mouth of the wolf. So if you are good enough to make it center stage, you have made it into the mouth of the wolf.
Oh,
so my first story was about a young opera singer who went to Vienna to study the opera, and an evil baron bought up her contract. And you can imagine from there where it might have gone. It was a little bit too gothic, yeah. But the two that I have, the two historical suspense that I have are Love Will Follow and the Samaritan Files. And I love the Samaritan Files. It's set in New York City, 1890s. I love that era when women were throwing off their corsets and riding bicycles, for the first time, so forth. Yeah. And then my major work that I just published a year ago is Courage in a White Coat. And that book, you can see it's a large book. It's 495 pages. But that is the true story of Dorothy Kinney. And she was a doctor from Colorado who got her degree in 1928, she wanted to be an obstetrician, and doctors in the United States at that time were not going to allow a woman to be an obstetrician. So they said she could be a psychiatrist if she wanted to, but she couldn't be an obstetrician. So she took a missionary post in India. And when she got there, the hospital that she was assigned to was an open air shed with just a thatched roof, no walls, no electricity, no running water, nothing. And in 10 years, she did surgery by Coleman lantern, lantern light. And in 10 years, she built it up to fully enclosed, modern building with electricity and running water and all of that, and had some incredible experiences as a doctor while she was doing that. Well, then she fell in love with another missionary. So they were posted then to the Philippines. And at that time, then she had the two children, Bobby and Carol. And this picture was taken in the Philippines just 8 months before the family was swept into a Japanese prison of war camp. And they nearly starved. Dorothy looked after the 400 children in the camp, was their doctor, and they were liberated. After 3 years of nearly starving, they were liberated by General MacArthur 24 hours before the whole camp was going to be executed.
Oh my goodness.
So yes, it's a very compelling, very dramatic story, true story based on all of her letters. And I wrote it in novel format, like Lauren Hillebrand, who wrote Unbroken and Seabiscuit. So it's written in novel format, but all based on her experience and taken from her letters, the things that she experienced. So
fascinating.
That's my biggest work. And then right now I'm working on my grandmother's biography, which I call The Last Cadenza. She was a concert violinist, as I told you, and she has a wonderful story. And then I'm working on an historical romance called the Duke's Russian Bride. And so and I actually have a contemporary going too. Is that a little bit schizophrenic?
But some of us are like that, though.
I do. I have a contemporary. It's not contemporary. It's from the 1950s and 60s. So I guess you could call it pseudo historical.
Yes.
But it's a story that's been in my head for years, so I really want to tell it. So it's called Late to the Dance.
Oh, how wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question from Gina, who is a publisher of your book, Courage in a White Coat.
Well, I am the publisher. And all the things that people will say or think with regard to that, but it's okay. I published the book because you know what? I'm a good publisher.
You are.
And it has received the Illumination Award Silver Medal for Best eBook with a Christian worldview. And it is getting good comments. Good. And so it's all right. I could have waited to shop it to publishers, but I did this for the Chambers family, Dorothy Kinney Chambers. Her son, baby Bobby, is my age. And he's a friend. And he said that he promised her on her deathbed, and she was 100 years old when she died. He promised her on her deathbed that he would write her story. And he tried, and he tried, and he tried. And one day he came to me and he says, I want you to write a story for me. And he brought me 5 notebooks of her letters that she had written home during the time she was in India. And so bits of those letters are all the way through the book. And it was such a compelling story. As soon as I began to read her and meet her through her letters, I was hooked. I had to tell her story. So I did this for Bob. Well, at our age, for him to wait 2 or 3 years for a traditional publisher to latch onto it and get it out there, what seemed cruel. Yes. So he wanted to get it out there. So I said, yes, I will publish it for you.
Sounds like a fantastic story.
Yeah, it's been a good experience. Mm-hmm.
Bonnie wants to know, are all your works published under Bailey Bristol?
No, just the first two, Love Will Follow and the Samaritan Files. But I'm going to tell you about Samaritan Files. At first, I called it the Samaritan Files, and it's historical, set in New York City. And then, by the time I was done with it, I loved those two characters so much, and they were so compelling. I thought, oh, they have to have another story. So I changed the name of it to, it was a series, and this was book one, The Devil's Dime. So it's out there places under both names, either The Devil's Dime or The Samaritan Files.
Oh,
and shouldn't mess around with a book like that, but oh well.
We're indie authors. We do it all the time.
Well, that's true. Because we can.
Exactly. So this Facebook user says, what is the most satisfying part of getting to tell these lesser known stories in depth?
Well, a woman like Dorothy Kinney, what were the odds that she would be able to go to medical school in Colorado in the 1920s, or go to India and do the things that she did? This woman, she learned surgeries by ostensibly by extension course.
Yeah.
Because a certain surgery would come up. She hadn't done it, hadn't been able to have a surgical residency, and even though she was second in her class, there were only two women in the whole medical class that she graduated in, and of all the men in the class, she graduated second in the class. But she learned these things. Things were just insurmountable, but she would accomplish them. And I admire that so much. And I admire the women of the 1890s who wanted to invent things, wanted to use their brains, and were thwarted at every turn. The first patent, and I'll have to double check this, but I'm pretty sure I'm right. In either the early 1800s, the very first patent at the United States Patent Office was by a woman, but of course they wouldn't accept it from a woman, so it had to go in under her husband's name.
Wow.
But it was a woman, and the things that women have done and overcome, I love telling those parts.
Oh,
I will always have music somewhere in my stories, because music is such a part of me that there's always a music element, and there always is a family found element in my stories. And I think family is not just a blood relative. Sometimes a person's closest family has no physical relation to them.
yes.
But is the person that they've needed in their life to feel the bond of family. And so there's always a family found element in the stories.
Yes. Gina would like to know, where do you have Courage in a White Coat available in print?
Well, it has been available in a couple of bookstores in Lincoln, but it's available at online at Amazon. So you can get the paperback at Amazon, or that would be the best place. But Francie and Finch Little Bookstore and the Indigo Bridge
Wonderful.
in Lincoln also have it.
Great. Also, did you make more books in the Samaritan series then?
No, I got sidetracked with, Laura Landon took off and just had so many books ready to go that I didn't dive into the next story. But I have I have the next story, which is The Bird in the Gilded Cage. And it's set in New York, 1890s also. And the same character, the same investigative reporter who is the hero of Devil's Dime is the hero in Bird in a Gilded Cage. And so I may get it out there one day, but I had 3 in mind that I was going to do.
Wonderful. How long does it take you to write a book?
Well, that's wild. It's all over the place for me because my very first book, I suppose, took about 4 months. But I was doing nothing else but writing and really focused on it. And so that went well. But the next book I wrote, which was The Devil's Dime, and it's a 360-page, full-length novel. It came out in 6 weeks.
Wow.
And I showed it to my agent, and she says, that's almost scary. 6 weeks, that's too fast. At that time, it was too fast. But and then when I came to Courage in a White Coat, the span of time was actually 8 years, because I wrote I wrote the prison camp part of the story, because the whole India hospital part of it was so overwhelming. I mean, it was 10 years worth of letters from her, and that was overwhelming. And so I really researched the prison of war part, and there are a lot of books written on the Santo Tomas prison camp they were in. And so I wrote that part and took it to the family, and they loved it. But they said, we want the India part too. So I said, oh, I got to do that. So I had to dive into her probably 1,000 letters.
Wow.
And read them all and get a feel for which stories I could put in the book. And for every story I could put in the book, I mean, there were 100 more that should be in the book, and it was really hard to pare it down to what and make it flow in a story. So I kind of agonized over it. And I think that whole time I wasn't really sure who Dorothy was. And then at one meeting with Dorothy's granddaughter, I made that comment, and she said, oh, I can tell you exactly who Dorothy was. And she said, do you watch Downton Abbey? And I said, oh, yes. And she said, well, she's Mary in Downton Abbey. She's the older daughter, wants to be just a free spirit, but won't be, because she's the responsible older daughter and will do the things that she's required to do. And just that simple description right there, all of a sudden, I felt like I knew now who Dorothy was, and I could write in her voice.
Oh, interesting.
And then it just came out. But it was about 12 months for that to come out, for me to get the whole story out. And when I took the book to Bob and his wife and his children to read it, I sent them the manuscript, and they had moved to Colorado at that time. So I made an appointment to come out and see them. I went out, we sat down at the dining room table, and I was just scared to death because I really felt I had the story well in hand. I thought it was mostly there. And I said, what did you think of the book? And nobody said anything. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is terrible. And then Bob's wife said, well, we think that Dorothy came down to sit beside you while you were writing this. And, all they could say was that it's her.
Wow.
It's her. And so I was thrilled. And there was one place where I hinted at some conflict between Dorothy and her husband. And, they brought that up, and I thought, so I apologized. I said, well, I'll take the conflict out. That was just me thinking maybe that would have happened. And she said, no. It needs to be more. Dorothy got more angry It needs to be higher. So that was the only comment in an almost 500-page book
Wow.
that they, that one little thing in that scene that they wanted changed and heightened. And other than that, but the fact that they felt it was so true to her was huge for me. It made every minute of that effort just like gold,
Yes.
because I had gotten her right, and that's what's so important in a biography. I mean, you have to get them right.
Yes.
So
Oh, that like gives me chills. That's wonderful.
it was a neat experience.
So, we've had lots and lots of questions about your book. Would you like to read an excerpt now from your book?
Oh, I would, sure. I'll tell you what. There are so many scenes that I could read something from the India part where she was a single doctor, but I'm going to start where they are married. They're in the Philippines, and they just now have been told that the Japanese are taking the island, and they have a decision to make. And there were about 30 missionaries that would get together regularly, and so they did. They got together and to decide, what are we going to do? And half of the missionaries wanted to go into the hills, and the Filipino people would hide them out. And our government was telling them it would only be 3 months and then things will be back to normal. And which, of course, turned into 3 years for them. And then the other ones thought they should stay, and whatever the Japanese did, that's what they would have to accept. And as it turned out, hospital that saved their lives, because the missionaries who went into the hills were found by the Japanese, and all the adults were beheaded and the children were killed as well. And there's a monument there in the Philippines to that group. It was called Hope Vale, the name of their little hideout that they made. But this is where Dorothy is almost decided that's what they should do, but she's not 100% sure. And so a lot of this is her thinking, which, of course, I'm writing what I thought she would be thinking. Dorothy slipped through the bamboo curtain that separated their side of the nipa hut from Anne and Henry Waters and their children. "How's the patient?" Fred asked. "Remarkably well," Dorothy replied as she stowed her instruments. "She's close, Fred. The baby will come soon." "I guess that's good." Dorothy sighed heavily. Good, yes, I suppose. Words had come hard in recent days. Dorothy had always known her mind, her heart, her mission, her course. That surety had kept communication clear and open and free. But she and Fred had not settled their future aloud, and now she was doubting the decision they'd all but verbalized. "I want to go to the hills," she thought. "It just feels safer. Or maybe not. How would I keep watch for them? Where would I look? Which way will they be coming from when they're ready to kill us? And they will kill us," Dorothy thought, not for the first time. "I'd be the example of why not to run from the Japanese. A martyr, maybe, but architect of my children's end? I can't do that." Dorothy folded the children's clothes she'd just taken from the laundry line and placed them in the gotta-go bag. There was going to be a day when they would once again need to gather their things quickly, not in minutes, but in seconds. The gotta-go bags were always ready, always, with bits of money and medicine spread between the bags, so if they lost one, they didn't lose it all. Dorothy already carried their birth certificates in a small pouch hung around her neck. The tacit agreement between Fred and Dorothy seemed to indicate internment was their plan. They would be found by the Japanese in the hospital and taken into custody. Now she's thinking again. Internment. Walking right into their arms? How do I do that? How do I take my babies by the hand and say, here we are, unwelcome army. We'll stay in your confined community. We'll carry on with our lives at the point of your guns every day. I can't do that. The hills are so green and dense. How could they find us there? Surely we could hide, just for a few months. Surely it can't take more than a few months. Our president promised us that. I can live in a hole in the ground for a few months. I can make it an adventure for Bobby and Carol. I can do it. I should do it. I have to keep them away from the guns. Dorothy? Fred's voice came to her from a great distance, farther away than the front porch, farther away than the yard of the little Philippine nipa hut, much farther. It came from beyond the green hills, the ones so clear in Dorothy's mind that she had felt for a moment that she was already there, farther than the hills whence cometh my help. Hey, pretty lady, you all right? Fred's arms encircled her waist, strong, steady, comforting, safe. Say it, Fred. What? Say it. We have to say it. We have to speak it out loud. Fred touched his forehead to hers. In the way it had always been in their marriage, he knew what she meant. If I say it, I'm not speaking for you. You have to say what your heart tells you to. Deal? She nodded. In his quiet, measured voice, Fred repeated their strategy. We know that if we run to the hills, the Filipinos will help us hide. But we know, too, that if they're caught helping us, they won't survive. We know that, right? So we must stay with the hospital. Hope the Japanese will honor our Red Cross. When we think they will be upon us soon, we'll move our things to the hospital. We'll burn the military pass and hide the card. We'll live at the hospital however long it takes for them to find us. We'll submit to their questions. We'll shelter our children. We'll go where they take us. We'll manage. Dorothy listened, and with each word, her heart began to calm. We'll manage, she echoed. Yes, we'll manage. She looked up into his face and knew that he saw resolution in her eyes. At last, she was fully on board. So that was her time of reckoning what they were going to do and coming to grips with it. But I have to read you also this short little thing. Here they are in the prison camp. They've been starving. The Red Cross, through the Geneva Conventions, was to be able to give one box a month, what they called a relief box, to every prisoner of war. Those boxes arrived in Manila, and they were warehoused by the Japanese. They were never distributed to the prison camp, except one time late in the war, a Japanese clerk who was sympathetic to the Americans and to the prisoners slid an order to distribute the boxes in with a bunch of other forms that he was having his commandant sign. And once a form was signed, a Japanese officer would not go back on it. So that group of boxes did get delivered to the camp. So here's Bobby, 4 years old, almost 4 years old, and tasting some of these things for the first time in his life, because he was 18 months old when he went into the camp. So this is his first taste of chocolate. Sweet Jesus, that was good. A startled silence swept over the small family that crouched in a circle on the floor of the chamber's cubbyhole. Dorothy, Fred, and Carol turned as one and stared at Bobby as he licked the chocolate from his fingers, the sound of his inappropriate comments still ringing in their ears. Fred had judiciously rationed each family member 1/2 of one square of one of the chocolate bars the kit contained, and with great pomp and ceremony, they'd each popped the small treat into their mouths on the count of 3. Too many in camp had already learned the hard way that these chocolate bars were packed with more than just good sweet chocolate. They were the D-ration bars, made to last a downed pilot several days, his only sustenance while waiting to be rescued. Eat them too fast in one sitting or even in one day, and misery knew no bounds. The groans coming from the restroom areas were clear and ominous testimony to that fact. Sweet Jesus? Dorothy darted a glance at Fred. Which one would feel this bit of discipline? It was such a joy having something to celebrate. It had been months since anything like this had captured the enthusiasm of the camp, had fostered such an undercurrent of swapping and neighborly dickering, even though jealous hoarding was the primary reaction of the day. Neither parent wanted to spoil this moment with a reprimand, but sweet Jesus, that kind of language simply could not be overlooked. Robert Bruce Chambers, you watch your mouth. Carol's little voice broke the silence, her scolding tone muted by her own smacking lips. Bobby slapped both his hands over his mouth and raised his eyebrows, darting a wild-eyed look at his mother and father. Then confusion settled on his face and his hands fell away. What? He looked at all three, then scrunched his scrawny shoulders. What did I say? His tone was incredulous. One could almost see his 3.5-year-old mind replaying the last few moments and finding nothing that begged for a scolding. What did I say? You said, sweet Jesus. Carol pointed her finger at her brother, saw a bit of errant chocolate there, and set about to lick her finger clean. Well, you just said it, sissy, so you watch your mouth. Did not, did too, did... Hold on now, you two. Fred's voice of authority squelched the squabble. Both children fell silent, hands dropped in their laps, faces suitably chagrined, waiting judgment. Bobby, why did you say those words, sweet Jesus? He stared Bobby down, crinkling his brows a bit to soften the inquisition. Bobby looked to his mother. Maybe, just maybe, she was going to intercede for him. But Dorothy just lifted one eyebrow and cocked her head a bit, as if to say, better speak up, son. I'm waiting, Fred urged. He was in trouble and he didn't have a clue why. People said sweet Jesus all the time. Then realization dawned and he knew just how to fix it. Well, what I meant was, sweet Jesus, that was good. Amen. And that's it.
I love it. That was great. That sounds like a fascinating book, Mary. I just can't wait to read it. It just, everything you've talked about with it, it just gives me chills, and it's such a wonderful story that these children were able to give you those letters and have you write that. It's amazing. So I'm really excited to get this book and start reading it. Thank you so much for coming on our show. Well,
thank you. It's been my pleasure, Victorine.
We are excited. Next week, we will have Dimitri Lombard will be on the show. Dimitri writes science fiction and fantasy and has been a member of the Guild since he was a tween. And his short stories and poetry have been published in the science fiction anthology Tales from the Perseus Arm and in the Apex magazine. And so we're really excited next week to interview Dimitri. If you would like to be an author on our author chat show, you can email me or contact me through the website. It's nebraskawriters.org. And you can hit the contact us button and send me a note, and I will hook you up with how to be on the show. You have to be a member of the Nebraska Writers Guild, but anybody can be a member. You don't have to be a published author or anything like that to be a part of the Nebraska Writers Guild. You don't even have to live in Nebraska. We have authors actually all over the world. We are actually doing a special show, not this Saturday, but next Saturday in the morning to accommodate an author who lives in the United Kingdom. So, and he didn't want to stay up till 1 o'clock in the morning to do an evening show with us. So we are inserting a special show just to get him on the show. Thank you all for joining us. I will post in the comments, I will post a link to Mary's book. So if anybody is interested in checking out Mary's book or her website, I will post links to those. And thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Bravo to all.
Good night, everybody.